What if everything you thought made you successful was actually destroying the most important thing in your life? Jack Thompson was about to find out the hard way, and his story will change how you think about what really matters. Jack Thompson stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor, looking down at the city he had conquered. At 35, he owned 3 luxury hotels, drove a Maserati, and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man who had everything: perfectly styled hair, a Rolex that caught the afternoon light, and eyes that sparkled with the confidence of someone who had never lost a deal. But here's what nobody knew about Jack's perfect life. Behind all that success was a man who had learned to measure his worth in dollar signs and social status. He had grown up poor, sleeping on couches, wearing hand-me-down clothes that never fit right. His mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, and his father? Well, his father had walked out when Jack was 12, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. That abandonment had carved something deep inside Jack's chest. He made a promise to himself that night, crying into his pillow while his mother sobbed in the next room. He would never be poor again. He would never be powerless again. And he would never, ever depend on anyone else for his happiness. So Jack built his empire brick by brick, deal by deal, relationship by relationship. He learned to charm investors over expensive dinners, to close deals with a handshake and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Money became his language, success his religion, and power his drug of choice. By the time he was 30, Jack had everything he thought he wanted: the penthouse apartment with a view of the harbor, the private jet, the collection of vintage wines that he never had time to drink. And then there was Emily Richardson, the woman who seemed to complete his perfect picture. Emily was everything Jack thought he needed in a partner. She came from old money, the kind of family that had trust funds and summer homes in the Hamptons. She was beautiful in that polished way that graced magazine covers, with perfectly straight blonde hair and a smile that photographers loved. She knew how to work a room at charity galas, how to make small talk with senators and CEOs, how to be the perfect accessory to Jack's rising star. Their relationship was like a business partnership wrapped in designer clothes and expensive jewelry. They attended the right events, vacationed in the right places, and were photographed by the right magazines. Emily understood Jack's world because she had grown up in it. She never questioned his long hours, his obsession with closing deals, or the way he sometimes stared out windows with a look that seemed to see right through everything. The proposal happened exactly as you'd expect. Jack rented out the most expensive restaurant in the city, hired a string quartet, and presented Emily with a diamond ring that cost more than most people's houses. She said yes, of course. The engagement photos appeared in 3 different lifestyle magazines, and the wedding planning began immediately. Jack threw himself into the wedding preparations with the same intensity he brought to his business deals. No detail was too small, no expense too great. He hired the most sought-after wedding planner in the city, booked the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, and flew in flowers from 3 different countries. The guest list read like a who's who of the business and social elite. But as the wedding day approached, something strange began happening to Jack. He started having dreams that felt more like memories, fragments of a life he had tried to forget. A woman with gentle eyes and calloused hands. A small apartment that smelled like home-cooked meals and lavender soap. A feeling of belonging that all his money couldn't buy. He pushed these thoughts away during the day, burying them under meetings and phone calls and the endless details of running his empire. But at night, when the city grew quiet and even the most dedicated workaholic had to sleep, the dreams came back stronger than ever. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of perfect sunshine that wedding planners pray for. Jack stood in his dressing room at the hotel, adjusting his custom-made tuxedo for the 100th time. His best man, a business partner named Marcus, was telling jokes that Jack barely heard. The room buzzed with the energy of groomsmen and wedding coordinators, but Jack felt strangely disconnected from it all. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw exactly what he had always wanted to become. Successful, powerful, untouchable. So why did he feel like something was missing? Why did success taste like ashes in his mouth? The wedding coordinator knocked on the door. "Mr. Thompson, we're ready for you in the main hall. Your guests are seated, and Miss Richardson is absolutely radiant." Jack nodded, straightened his tie one final time, and prepared to walk into what should have been the happiest day of his life. He had no idea that in less than an hour, a woman and a young boy would walk through those same doors and change everything he thought he knew about himself. Sometimes the universe has a way of forcing us to face the truths we've been running from our entire lives. And sometimes, those truths come wearing a simple dress and holding the hand of a child who has your eyes. The grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton looked like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, and white roses climbed up pillars that reached toward a ceiling painted with gold accents. 300 of the city's most important people filled the elegant space, their conversations creating a gentle hum of anticipation. Jack stood at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back, trying to ignore the strange feeling in his chest. The string quartet played softly as guests continued to arrive, each one representing a connection, a business opportunity, or a step higher on the social ladder he had spent years climbing. That's when he saw her. At first, Jack thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. A woman in a simple navy blue dress stood at the entrance to the ballroom, scanning the crowd with uncertain eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore minimal makeup that couldn't hide the natural beauty of her face. But it wasn't her appearance that made Jack's heart stop beating for a moment. It was the recognition that hit him like a physical blow. Sarah Martinez, the woman he had loved 7 years ago, back when he was still clawing his way up from nothing, back when he still believed that love might be enough to build a life on. Next to her stood a young boy, maybe 6 years old, with dark hair and serious eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. The child wore a small suit that looked like it had been carefully chosen from a department store, not the kind of custom tailoring that filled this room. His little hand gripped Sarah's tightly, and he stayed close to her side as they made their way into the ballroom. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. The resemblance was unmistakable. The boy had Jack's nose, his stubborn chin, and most shocking of all, his eyes. Those same green eyes that Jack saw in the mirror every morning, now looking back at him from the face of a child he had never met. The wedding coordinator appeared at Jack's elbow, whispering urgently, "Mr. Thompson, there seems to be some confusion. There's a woman here with a child who isn't on the guest list, but she insists she needs to speak with you. Should I have security escort them out?" Jack's mouth went dry. He looked across the room again and saw Sarah watching him, her expression calm but determined. She wasn't making a scene or trying to disrupt anything. She was simply there, waiting, with the patience of someone who had learned to expect very little from life but still hoped for the best. "No," Jack managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll handle this." He stepped down from the altar, ignoring the confused murmurs from the wedding party behind him. Emily, resplendent in her designer wedding gown, called out to him from the bridal suite entrance, but Jack barely heard her. His entire focus was on the woman and child who had just walked into his carefully constructed world and turned it upside down. As he approached, Jack could see the details that made his chest tighten with recognition and regret. Sarah looked older, more tired than he remembered, but there was a strength in her posture that hadn't been there 7 years ago. She had the look of someone who had faced challenges and survived them, who had learned to stand on her own 2 feet, even when the ground beneath her kept shifting. The little boy pressed closer to his mother as Jack approached, instinctively sensing the tension in the air. But his eyes never left Jack's face, studying him with the kind of intense curiosity that children have when they're trying to figure out where they fit in the world. "Hello, Jack," Sarah said quietly when he reached them. Her voice was steady, but Jack could hear the slight tremor underneath. "I'm sorry to interrupt your wedding day. I know this isn't ideal timing, but I needed to come. We needed to come." Jack stood frozen, his mind racing through 1,000 different responses and finding none of them adequate. Around them, the wedding guests continued their conversations, unaware that the groom's entire world was crumbling and rebuilding itself in the space of a few heartbeats. "Sarah," he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't felt in years. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" She gestured toward the boy, who was still watching Jack with those familiar green eyes. "This is Ethan, your son. He's been asking about his father, and I thought it was time he met you." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He had suspected, of course, from the moment he saw the child's face. But hearing it spoken aloud, in the middle of his wedding day, surrounded by 300 guests who represented everything he had built his life around, made it real in a way that nothing else could. "My son," Jack repeated, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He looked down at Ethan, who was still clinging to his mother's hand but had stepped slightly forward, as if drawn by some invisible connection. "Hi," Ethan said softly, his small voice barely audible over the background noise of the reception. "Are you really my dad?" Jack felt his knees go weak. He had negotiated million-dollar deals, given speeches to rooms full of investors, and commanded respect from some of the most powerful people in the city. But this 6-year-old boy with his eyes and his mother's gentle spirit had just asked him the most important question of his life, and Jack had no idea how to answer. The wedding coordinator appeared again, this time with more urgency. "Mr. Thompson, Miss Richardson is asking for you. The ceremony is supposed to begin in 5 minutes." Jack looked back toward the altar, where Emily waited in her perfect dress, surrounded by perfect flowers, in front of perfect guests. Then he looked at Sarah and Ethan, 2 people who represented a life he had walked away from, a choice he had made when he decided that success was more important than love. "I need to talk to you," he said to Sarah, his voice barely controlled. "Both of you. But not here. Not like this." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. "We can wait. We've waited this long." But as Jack turned to walk back toward his wedding party, toward the life he had spent years building, he realized that some moments change everything. Some truths, once spoken, can never be taken back. And some choices, once made, echo through generations. The little boy, who looked exactly like him, was still watching, still waiting for an answer to the most important question in both their lives. Jack walked back toward the altar in a daze, his mind spinning with memories he had buried deep. 7 years ago, he had been a different man. Still ambitious, still driven, but not yet completely consumed by his need for success. He had met Sarah at a coffee shop near his first office, a tiny space above a dry cleaner where he was trying to get his real estate business off the ground. She had been working 2 jobs then, waiting tables at night and studying to become a teacher during the day. Jack remembered how she would stay up late helping him with his business plans, making coffee at midnight while he worked on proposals that might make or break his future. She believed in him when he barely believed in himself. Their relationship had been real in a way that nothing in Jack's life had been since. Sarah didn't care about his designer clothes or expensive restaurants. She was happy sharing a pizza on his couch, falling asleep in his arms while old movies played on his small television. She made him laugh, made him feel like he could be himself instead of the successful image he was working so hard to create. But then the opportunities started coming. Bigger deals, more money, higher profile clients. Jack found himself working longer hours, traveling more, missing dinners and dates, and the little moments that Sarah seemed to treasure. She tried to be understanding, tried to support his dreams, but Jack could see the loneliness in her eyes when he came home exhausted at midnight, too tired to do anything but collapse into bed. The night he left her, Jack had convinced himself it was the right thing to do. He was on the verge of a major breakthrough, a deal that would set him up for life. But it would require him to move to New York for 6 months to dedicate every waking moment to making it happen. Sarah had looked at him with tears in her eyes and asked if they could make it work long distance, if he could find a way to balance his career with their relationship. Jack had said no. He had told her that he couldn't give her what she needed, that his business had to come first. He had walked away that night telling himself that he was protecting her from a future of being second place in his life. But the truth was, he was protecting himself from having to choose between love and success. He never knew she was pregnant. Now, standing at the altar of his wedding to another woman, Jack felt the weight of that choice pressing down on him like a physical force. Emily approached from the bridal suite, her dress rustling with each step, her face glowing with the happiness of someone who had no idea that her perfect day was about to implode. "Darling, what's wrong?" Emily asked, reaching for his hand. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" Jack looked at her, this beautiful woman who fit so perfectly into his world, who understood the importance of appearances and social connections and business networks. Emily was everything he had thought he wanted in a partner. She was safe, predictable, part of the plan he had laid out for his life. But looking at her now, Jack realized something that made his stomach clench with a mixture of guilt and clarity. He didn't love Emily. He had never loved Emily. He had chosen her because she made sense, because she completed the picture of success he had been painting for himself. She was a business decision wrapped in a beautiful package, a merger disguised as a marriage. "I need a moment," Jack said, his voice tight. "Give me just a minute." Emily's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "Of course. I'll wait for you." Jack stepped away from the altar, his eyes searching the crowd until he found Sarah and Ethan